We are speaking on insight into the nature of time as expressed in and through the Ramayana.
Ready?
Yeah, Dr. David, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here and to participate in this illustrious conference and to hear the wonderful talks that are being presented. I'm a physicist from Maharishi University of Management and have been a devotee of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi since 1970, and my wife and I are here in India, traveling and coming to this conference. So I want to speak about time in the Ramayana and time as it's being glimpsed, at least, by contemporary physics, by advances in modern physics, that lead to an understanding of time that is something between the gross waking state conception of time that we're all familiar with and the timelessness of the transcendental realm where next and back. Next, back. Thank you. So there's the transcendental realm at the very basis of consciousness, and then there's the gross waking state realm, but in between that, there are layers of subtler realms, all the way to Brahmaloka and the lokas at the very borderline between the subtle relative and the absolute. So what are the themes in the Ramayana that point to this deeper, more expanded understanding of time that contemporary physics is starting to glimpse? Well, there are three themes that I want to point to. One has to do with the status of the Ramayana as a great epic, an archetype. It describes a historical sequence of events that happened in history, and scholars can debate on when exactly in history the events of the Ramayana took place. But in addition, the Ramayana embodies an eternal archetype, the impulses of natural law that generate dharma wherever it's experienced in life, even in the lives of us ordinary human beings. Those derive from this eternal level of reality in which these impulses of natural law are eternal and can be cognized by anyone with sufficiently refined consciousness. The second theme in the Ramayana has to do with precognition. The great sage Valmiki was asking, is there such a thing as a perfect man? He didn't know of one and wondered whether such a man exists or will exist or can exist. And the sage Narada told him the story of Ramayana. And interestingly, Valmiki himself appears in the Ramayana when Rama is first sent out from Ayodhya by his father Dasaratha. He goes to Valmiki's ashram and stays with Valmiki for a time. And then much later in the story, when Rama sends Sita out to the forest, she lives in Valmiki's ashram, and her two sons, Lava and Kush, are taught the Ramayana in its entirety. So the Ramayana itself hints at this capacity for precognition, for knowing and cognizing something even before it's happened. It points to an understanding of time which is more entangled, in which the past, present, and future have elements of each other mingled together in a way that's not familiar to us from ordinary waking state understanding of time. The final theme in the story of Ramayana that I want to allude to has to do with the question of what is time. Is it something subjective in our own consciousness that's created by consciousness? Or is it something objective which exists in the world independently? These are the kinds of questions which scientists and philosophers of science are very interested in. Well, in the Ramayana, time comes to Rama in a personified form as a deity. Kala himself comes and visits Ram at the end of his life and explains to him that his time is up on earth and it's ready for him to reassume his form as Vishnu himself. So with that introduction, let me look at the detailed exposition. Kala comes to see Rama, and here's Kala depicted as riding on a water buffalo. The Ramayana unfolds in a temporal sequence. King Dasara's fateful decision is followed by Rama's exile, which is followed by Sita's abduction, which in turn is followed by the invasion of Lanka and the slaying of Ravana and their return to Ayodhya. So there is a sequence in time exists in the Ramayana, and yet the Ramayana itself exists as an eternal archetype outside the realm of the relative. And yet this timeless epic is traditionally conceived as an eternal archetype, which it is possible to access in its pure form and in its totality by any seer whose awareness is sufficiently refined. This conception of an eternal temporality, sometimes called sempiternity or angel time, suggests that our all-or-nothing notion of the reality of our familiar waking state of consciousness may be limited and incomplete. One day, this is from Linda Agnes and Kumada Reddy, retelling of the Ramayana. It's a wonderful new retelling of the Ramayana, which has just been published. One day, while Rama was sitting on his throne in the royal court, Kala, the spirit of time, came to visit. He said, "O Rama, I must speak to you alone. Please guard the doors and let no one enter on pain of death." Rama asked the ever-faithful Lakshman to stand outside and guard the doors as Kala had requested. Then Kala spoke to Ram, but Rama already knew what he had to say. "Esteemed Rama, now that you have lived a long and just life true to Dharma, I have been sent by Lord Brahma to bring you back to your heavenly abode." Rama nodded his consent. How is it that time can be a deity, that time can be not only on the subjective side of the objective-subjective bifurcation of reality, but also at its very deepest celestial level? How can that law of nature be personified as a deity? Well, in the analysis of experience, this question of subjectivity and objectivity has a long history. And in the analysis of experience, we have how does experience happen? How do we see a flower, for example? Well, a source of light illuminates the flower. Here's the story from science. The light rays are reflected into the retina of the perceiver, and they stimulate a sequence of neurochemical events from the optical nerve to the neurocortex in the occipital lobe of the brain. And that gives rise to an image of the flower. And yet there's only one flower. It's as if there's an entanglement between subjectivity and objectivity. The world as we perceive it can be understood either as subjective reality, as we perceive in our own bubble world, or it can be perceived as objective reality and supposed to exist independent of consciousness, the way science likes to, at least in classical physics, liked to imagine that the world was. Well, this question of subjectivity and objectivity was very much on the mind of the great founder of quantum mechanics. He's a Danish physicist named Niels Bohr. And Bohr used to introduce his students to quantum mechanics by telling them the story of the blind man and the stick, which illustrates the entanglement of subjectivity, our own personal conscious experience, and objectivity, what exists independent. There's an ambiguity which it points to the entanglement, the intermingling of subjectivity and objectivity. And here's what Bohr said. He said, suppose a blind man uses a stick to orient himself in his environment. When he holds the stick loosely, he regards the stick as an external object, a part of his environment in which he needs to orient himself. But if he holds the stick firmly, he regards the stick as an extended part of himself, giving him information about his environment. So is the stick part of objective reality, or is it part of his sensory apparatus, part of his own subjective person? It depends whether he holds it loosely or tightly. And that ambiguity points to the entanglement. There is no sharp divide between subjectivity and objectivity, according to Bohr, and insofar as Bohr was the father of quantum mechanics, according to quantum physics. This distinction between the blind man, the subject, and the environment, the object, begins at one end of his stick or the other and is arbitrary. This arbitrariness suggests that it may be a mistake to conceive of subject and object as essentially separate and distinct phenomena. Well, Rama studied in his youth with the great sage Vasishta, and Vasishta answered Rama's question. This is from the Venkatesananda, the Concise Yoga of Vasishta. Rama, to the lotus of youthfulness, time is the nightfall. To the elephant of lifespan, time is the lion. In this world there is nothing high or low that time does not destroy. And even when all these are destroyed, time is not destroyed. Just as a man after a day's activity rests in sleep as if in ignorance, even so time after the cosmic dissolution sleeps or rests with the creation potential hidden in it. No one really knows what this time is. So Rama is asking Vasishta for guidance. What is time? In the time I've just described, there is another time which is responsible for birth and death. People refer to it as the deity presiding over death. In fact, time, Kala, is sometimes equated with Yama, the great god of birth and death. And Vasishta teaches Rama about time. He says, O Rama, I shall now impart to you the wisdom which was revealed to me by the divine creator Brahma himself. O Rama, countless have been the universes that have come into being and that have been dissolved. Here, Vasishta is anticipating what modern physics calls the multiverse, that in each universe, from the Big Bang of our universe, time and space emerge. All of our time originate from this Big Bang. And yet there are multiple universes. So how are they related in space and time? There must be a cosmic space and time which encapsulates not only the space-time of our universe, but also of the multiverse. O Rama, countless have been the universes that have come into being and that have been dissolved. In fact, even the countless universes that exist at this moment are impossible to conceive of. One can be immediately realized in one's own heart, for these universes are the origins of the desires that arise in the heart, like castles built in the air. Neither the fact of matter nor the modes of creation are truly real, yet the living and the dead feel they are real. This is Vasishta's answer, that the subtle realms emerge as if from a cosmic cognitive faculty of imagination. The same imagination that we as individuals experience as artists and scientists and in our dreams, but in its pure form, this cosmic imagination creates the universe, including the space and time that give it its structure. Now, in Plato, this question of subjectivity and objectivity of time was resolved in a poetic way in his great dialogue, the Timaeus. So from Western philosophy, we have Plato say, he, meaning God, the demiurge he called it, he, God, resolved to have a moving image of eternity. And this phrase, time as a moving image of eternity, he was thinking of the great sphere of the heavens, which are like a cosmic clock and keep time, but they're embedded in the ether. And for Plato, the ether was a spiritual substance. So it was embedded in subjectivity, even though it gave a number, a measure of time to those of us in waking state on earth, in the gross relative. He resolved to have a moving image of eternity, and when he set in order the heaven, he made this image eternal, but moving according to number. In other words, we can count the days, 1, 2, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, like that. While eternity itself rests in unity, in this image we call time. This is similar to the time of the physicists. For physicist Einstein, for example, when he talks about time, he talks about a clock, and very much talking about the measure of motion, the measure of change. For there were no days and nights and months and years before the heaven was created, but when he constructed the heaven, he created them also. That's true of the Big Bang theory. Also, there was no time of our ordinary time until the Big Bang, for it was in the Big Bang that space-time emerges. They are all parts of time, and the past and future are created species of time, which we unconsciously but wrongly transfer to the eternal essence. These species of time, or phases of time, past, present, and future, we suppose are part of objective time, but here Plato is suggesting that we wrongly transfer them to the eternal essence. That for Plato, reality is eternal, and these phases of time, past, present, and future, are part of our subjective reality. In fact, as the Buddhists have done, you can imagine all of time as being in our own consciousness, not just the present, but that the past is present in our present experience as memory. So the past exists now in our memory, and the future exists in our expectations and our anticipations, but they're all in the eternal now. Some versions of Buddhism make that doctrine explicit, and this suggests that these phases of time, past, present, and future, are part of subjective reality, not the objective reality. Not only do we measure change by time, but time by change, because they are defined by one another. This is from Aristotle in the Physics, pointing to the intermingling and entangling of time. Now, Isaac Newton represents the classical physics approach to understanding reality, and he takes our gross waking state conception of time as literally true of objective reality. And for him, the modes of time, meaning duration, how long an event takes, sequence, one event after another, simultaneity, these modes of time and these phases of time, past, present, and future, are for Isaac Newton all part of objective reality. Time is a substantial reality, meaning it exists independent of the observer, independent of consciousness. But a more sophisticated notion was developed by the great philosopher Leibniz, who said that time is a relationship, as if a property of objects and events. So whether they exist in sequence, whether they exist simultaneously, these are relationships which our consciousness imposes on or which are abstracted from the underlying reality. So we see a kind of going from a substantial time that subsists whether or not we're aware of it for Isaac Newton, to time as a relationship, a more subtle, more abstract conception of time, and finally to Immanuel Kant, who says that those abstract relationships are imparted to reality by our consciousness, our cognitive faculties. Immanuel Kant had a very Vedic conception, and the Vedic conception, which I learned from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, is very similar to the Western philosopher Immanuel Kant, for which the transcendental reality itself gives rise to both subjectivity and objectivity, and they seem to be separate and apart, and yet their entanglement is there if you probe deeply enough, as modern physics is starting to do. So Kant said, what are space and time? Are they actual entities, like Isaac Newton thought? No. Are they only determinations or relations of things, yet ones that would pertain to them even if they were not intuited, as Leibniz thought? Or, so he's arguing with Newton and Leibniz here. Or are they relations that only attach to the form of intuition alone? Intuition is our direct experience that the observer himself imparts this structure and order on time. And thus to the subjective constitution of our mind, without which these predicates could not be ascribed to anything at all. So now, here Newton, space and time are a static container. Leibniz, space and time are the relations between material events. And Einstein took Leibniz's perspective and made it the basis for his physics. Here we have general relativity, where the star itself, matter, deforms the fabric of space and time. And finally, Immanuel Kant, the most sophisticated understanding, approaching the Vedic understanding, space and time are forms of perceptual intuition. So we've come from the gross relative classical physics conception of space and time as existing independently in objective reality, to the more refined view of Leibniz, where space and time are relations between events, to the more sophisticated approaching the Vedic conception, in which space and time are firmly embedded in subjective consciousness. And if they are in consciousness, then it's possible for a conscious being at the celestial level, that finest level, to actually be time personified, as the Ramayana teaches us. So finally, here's some physics. In quantum physics, everybody knows about particles being entangled. Here we have two particles being entangled, so where you make a measurement on one, it affects the other one automatically, even instantaneously. And contemporary string theories are supposing that there are wormholes that connect the entangled particles through the fabric of the unified field.
We will conclude, please.
Yes, okay. So I'll conclude by saying that if consciousness is the basis of time, then by developing consciousness and stimulating consciousness, Maharishi taught that we can actually uplift the trends of time. And Girish Varmaji and Harris Kaplan are very much concerned to restore the yagyas and the Vedic chanting. And here we have thousands of pundits in the Brahmistan of India, very close to Jabalpur here. Here's a picture of them chanting the Veda. And we know that when Rama was sent out from Ayodhya, and he spent 14 years in the forest, his mission there was to defeat the Rakshasas, the demons who were interfering with the yagyas. And now we have Girish Varma and Harris Kaplan restoring the yagyas in their pure form, and the goal is to bring about 9,000 Vedic pundits, and here there are a couple of thousand of them chanting the Vedas. Here they are again, here. So that's the note that I want to conclude on, that time is part of the subjective consciousness reality. It has a very deep level, that the entanglement of time means that the level of consciousness of our experience now can crystallize time not only at the present, but also the entangled time all the way back to the Big Bang and out into the future as far as we can see. Thank you very much.
धन्यवाद डॉक्टर डेविड श्राफ यूएसए से। अब मैं अनुरोध करूंगा डॉक्टर मिथिला प्रसाद त्रिपाठी इंदौर से, वो रामायण में लोक विश्व की बात बताएंगे। डॉक्टर डेविड श्राफ spoke that space and time emerges with Big Bang.